Hello, once again, amazing third grade math teachers. Welcome back to another prep talk where we get you ready for your PLC the week of September 26th, where you'll be planning the content that you'll teach to your students on the week of October 3rd. As always in these videos, we'll take a look at the weekly overview of what you'll be teaching that week and talk to you about some teaching strategies and star-released questions that you'll see for the TEKs that we'll be teaching the week of October 3rd. So as we take a look at our weekly overview, as you guys know, we've been talking about subtraction for quite a while now, and we're going to put a bow on subtraction this week by talking about the standard algorithm. That will finish our discussion on TEK 3.4a. We'll then move into talking about 3.5a, which tells students that they must be able to represent real-world relationships using number pairs in a table and verbal descriptions. You'll notice that this readiness TEK has been tested 10 times in the last 5 years. You will then start the next week also talking about this particular TEK. So this work will continue into the following week. You'll notice that we've put a flex day for district checkpoint testing, so wherever your campus decides to checkpoint and test on that day, obviously plug the flex day into that particular day and move this around as necessary. As we take a look at our first lesson of the week, we're going to be renaming and relating to the standard algorithm. Your third grade students in second grade worked through this TEK 2.2a, which tells them to use concrete and pictorial models to compose and decompose numbers up to 1,200 in more than one way, as a sum of so many thousands and so many hundreds and tens and ones. And so the question is, how can you describe the number 403 using place value? Well, one place that you might start is by saying 4 hundreds, 0 tens, and 3 ones. But this would obviously not be the only way to describe this number using place value. Another way that we could do this is perhaps by saying 3 hundreds, 10 tens, which represents the other 100, and 3 ones. We could go even further and say that this would also be the same as 3 hundreds and then 9 tens to go along with 13 ones. This is a skill that your students learned how to do in second grade. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. How does this connect to base 10 blocks and subtraction? Well, I love when you ask questions that go right along with my video. This is exactly what students are doing whenever they borrow from a bigger place value in order to regroup and do subtraction in the standard algorithm. And so we're going to show students using a skill from the previous grade level how they can apply that skill to the current grade level and the idea of subtraction. So as we look at this problem, 138 tickets are still available for Saturday night's show at a theater. There are 403 seats in a theater. How many tickets have already been sold? What we know is to be able to solve this problem, we need to set up subtraction. We're going to do this by place value, hundreds, tens, and ones. We start with the bigger number in the problem. That would have 4 hundreds, 0 tens, and 3 ones. We subtract from that the smaller number, which has 100, 3 tens, and 8 ones. Now we are going to subtract this using the standard algorithm. What we notice is that in the ones place, we can't subtract 8 from 3. We don't have enough ones in order to be able to subtract 8. This is where the borrowing and regrouping process comes into play. And so what we notice here is that we're actually going to have to borrow from the hundreds place and reduce that by 3 so that we can put a 10 in the tens place. However, we still need to get over into the ones place. And so we're going to have to borrow one of those tens and make that a 9 so that we can have 13 ones instead of just 3. This now makes the subtraction in the ones place possible. 13 minus 8 is 5. Then in the tens place, we have 9 subtract 3, which of course gives us 6. And finally, in the hundreds place, 3 minus 1 is a 2, so that the answer to this problem is 265. When it comes to TEK 3.4a, students must see a variety of problem types, some that involve borrowing and regrouping, and others that do not. You don't want your students to always think that they're going to have to borrow or regroup. You want to show them some easy problems so that they don't always get into the procedural thinking of having to borrow and regroup. They must also be seeing real-world problems that involve multiple steps. We highly encourage you to allow and even encourage your students to show proficiency in multiple ways. This may look like having students use a different method, such as subtraction on an open number line, in order to prove their answer that they got using the standard algorithm. For students that need to be pushed, you may consider having them come up with a word problem or even a multi-step word problem, and then have them solve it 2 different ways to come up with a key for that particular question. Anchor charts are a great resource for your classroom to always be able to come back to remind students of things that they have learned. Please look at this anchor chart suggestion and consider using something similar in your classroom. You'll notice that this particular example has several different scenarios that come up in the standard algorithm. For example, if more is on top, no need to stop, meaning if you do not need to borrow or regroup, you can just proceed with the subtraction. More on the floor, go next door and get 100 or 10 more. This is the borrowing or regrouping process, as students can plainly see in this anchor chart. And then the last scenario is when you are subtracting a number from itself, which would indicate a 0. And so this is a very good example of an anchor chart. Please consider using something similar or just steal this one for your classroom needs. We'll finish our discussion on subtraction using the standard algorithm by looking at this star-released question. Wanda traveled on an airplane 3 times last year. We have the number of miles that she traveled in 3 separate months, and we want to know how many more miles Wanda traveled in January and April combined than she traveled in September. Well, you'll notice that this is a multi-step problem. This is actually a 2-step problem, because the first thing that we're going to have to do is figure out the number of miles that Wanda traveled in January and April combined. And so we're going to have to take the 2 numbers in these bullet points and add them together. So 278 plus 652. In the ones place, 8 plus 2 is 10, carry my 1. 1 plus 7 is 8, plus 5 is 13, carry my 1. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 6 is 9. 930 miles for Wanda in January and April combined. Step 2 is now we want to find the difference between that number, 930, and the number of miles that she traveled in September, which is 767. Using the standard algorithm, what I notice is that immediately in the ones place, I have more on bottom, and so more on the floor means I'm going to need to go next door in order to borrow or regroup. And so we will take that 3 tens and make it 2 tens, and then make this 10 ones instead of 0 ones. That allows me to now do the subtraction in the ones place. When we have 10 subtract 7, that gives us a result of 3. Then we move on to the tens place, 2 minus 6. Well, I cannot take 6 tens from 2 tens, and so once again, I'm going to have to go to the next place value over, take one of those, and regroup it into the tens place. And so that adds 10 tens to that tens place, and so now I am able to do the subtraction. Taking 6 tens away from 12 tens is going to end up giving me 6 tens. Finally, in the hundreds place, we notice that our bigger number is on top, and so because we have more on top, the fun doesn't stop. 8 minus 7 will give me 1 in the hundreds place for an answer of 163 miles. For our next TEK 3.5e, students must represent real-world relationships using number pairs in a table and verbal descriptions. This TEK actually encompasses all 4 operations, but we will only be focusing on addition and subtraction in these 2 days, and then come back later to multiplication and division. We want students to be able to identify patterns in tables. And so what we see in this particular STAR-released question is that the test score before bonus points plus 4 is always the test score after bonus points. And so we want students to be able to identify that pattern, that the right column is always 4 more than the left column. And so students will be able must be able to write this in a sentence, or at least be able to pick the correct sentence from some choices. When it comes to STAR 2.0, this would make a great drag and drop question, or perhaps an inline choice, where students are having to figure out which of these 4 options go into the sentence. What we notice here is that the test score before points plus 4 equals the test score after bonus points, which of course would be letter D as the correct answer. In this STAR-released question, we're told that campers at a lake rented 18 more canoes than paddle boats each week. What we can do is have students immediately analyze that portion of the problem and recognize that we should always have more canoes than paddle boats in our table. If we look at answer choice F, we see that we have more paddle boats than canoes. And so answer F is automatically incorrect just based on what the problem is saying. Then what we notice is that we have to have 18 more canoes than paddle boats at all times. This cannot just happen for one scenario or 2 scenarios. It must be true for every row in the table. And so if we start with letter G, then what we see is that we have 17 and 54. Well, coming over here and just subtracting to see if we do have 18 more, 17 minus 54 would be 18. And so this one checks off. Then if we go to the next one, we automatically realize that we have more paddle boats than we do canoes. And so that right there tells me that G cannot be correct. Then, if we go to the next answer choice, H, 72 minus 54, well, we already did that. That was 18. Then, if we do the next one, we have 37 minus 19, and that is also 18. And students can continue going down the line and notice that the number of canoes is always 18 more than the number of paddle boats. Now, what can be really powerful in a question like this is that you might have students do it another way. In fact, something that might happen is you might have a student take the number of paddle boats, let's say 54, and add 18 to that to see if they end up with 72. This would be a great idea to get students talking and processing through the different ways of thinking about these particular problems. You'll notice that J automatically has more canoes than paddle boats. That's good, but it's not 18 more. And so from the very first row in J, I know that it is incorrect and letter H must be the right answer. If you have any questions about anything that was covered in this video, or as you're working through the other STAR-released questions, if something pops up, we would love to help you with that on our office hours, Tuesday, September 27th from 3:30 to 4. You can jump on, ask your question, and then hop off. It is a come-and-go environment, so please come and ask any questions that you might have on 3rd grade math. And as always, before you go, please fill out our survey using the QR code to the left or the link provided so that we can know that you watched the video and you can help us with your feedback to serve you better in future videos. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. We hope it was helpful in your preparation for this week of October 3rd in your classrooms.